So, Roger, I want to get your take on this. Is the investigation, does that threaten Fed independence, or the idea of this actually somehow going to trial and Jay Powell facing an actual trial is just the probe itself? Does that threaten Fed independence?
I think it's always perceived that way. You can see by some of the reactions that people have had. This is completely unprecedented. Never in the history of the Fed has a chair been probed for criminal behavior. So look, everyone has seen this very much as an effort to influence interest rate policy. So I would say yes, it's a flag up, a flare up saying Fed independence is being threatened.
Okay. A lot of people see this as a move by the administration just to get Jay Powell to step down from the central bank altogether when his term as chair ends, if not sooner, clearly. Obviously, if there's some type of criminal proceedings, it could happen sooner. Just give us a sense. You've been in these rooms before. When a former Fed chair becomes just a part of the FOMC, how are they perceived? Do they have the same level of sway as they did when they had chair? Or how does that dynamic change when it comes to the group?
Well, to be very clear, we've not been in a situation where a former Fed chair was also staying on the board, so it would be unprecedented. I think the truth of the matter is if Chair Powell decided to stay on after his term is over, it would signal some concern about Fed independence. It would signal his personal worry, I'm sure, about the future of the institution. And I think people around the table would take that very seriously. The fact that we are in such unprecedented territory, I think, cannot be passed over lightly, and an unusual move such as the former chair staying in the FOMC would, I think, certainly indicate that the committee had to be very vigilant to look out for its own independence and make decisions based purely on economics, not on incoming political pressure.
All right. What do you make of some of the speculation about who the next Fed chair is going to be? I mean, we have a couple of people that seem to be candidates. The front runner is Kevin Hassett, but there's also Kevin Warsh, Chris Waller, and also Rick Reeder. We just played a soundbite for him earlier. What do you make of this? Have you ever seen a situation where it's kind of this horse race that's so public, well ahead of the end of the term of the next chair?
I've been through 2 or 3 chair selections, and there's always speculation for sure. And indeed, it's public in the sense that it's in the newspaper. What's unusual here is 2 things. One is the White House itself talking about who they're interviewing. Normally, that doesn't occur. And second, obviously, the backdrop, where whoever sits in that chair next, whoever is nominated, I think is going to answer some very serious questions about independence from the president, which normally are not questions that one asks a nominee. And their various moves, first and second moves, will be closely parsed to make sure they're based on data and not on politics. So I think that's what's unusual here. Not the speculation about names always occurs, but really whether the attention that's going to flow to that person based on a question that's almost never been asked, which is, will you be truly independent in setting monetary policy?
Roger, we just got something that just crossed the wires a short time ago. It's a statement from international central bankers in support of Fed Chair Jay Powell. Part of it, I'm just going to read very quickly. We stand in full solidarity with the Federal Reserve System and its chair, Jerome Powell. The independence of central banks is a cornerstone of price, financial, and economic stability. They go on. I think you can imagine the tone of this email. It is signed by the governor of the Bank of England, the ECB Governing Council, the governor of the Central Bank of Australia, the governor of the Bank of Canada, on and on. What do you make of this very vocal support from other international central banks as well?
It reflects 2 things. One is the now deep understanding that independent central banks, not just in the U.S., but around the world, are important to maintaining financial stability and keeping inflation under control. I think that's just, well recognized now. So it is a reflection of what's known in the textbooks. But secondly, more importantly, the timing clearly suggests that the entire global infrastructure is watching closely what's happening here in the U.S., and it feels that it's critical to speak out. Again, unusual times calling for unusual behaviors by a normally very circumspect and relatively quiet group of people. Also highly unusual, obviously, to have international central banks weighing into what is, to some degree, a political issue here in the United States. Normally, people stay out of the politics of other countries. So highly unusual on several scores, though they are simply, but very importantly, reminding people of the importance of independent central banks to global financial stability.
All right. It almost seems like an afterthought right now, but we do have CPI coming up later today. How do you think the central bank's going to view this CPI report? How important is it when it comes to the decision-making process? Of course, we also have jobs reports coming up, and we've been seeing a very strong economy. That last read from the Atlanta Fed on GDP now showing 5.4% for Q4. Very strong read there.
Look, I think all of these incoming data have to be read against the backdrop of a Fed that was closely divided in the last rate decision. The minutes show that it was as a cliffhanger as much as one could be in central banking. And so incoming data giving ammunition to either side that the labor market is weakening dramatically or that inflation is or is not sticky, I think takes on outsized relevance when the decision is clearly such a close call. And we'll see how markets react. But I think the January meeting is very much one of great uncertainty. And unfortunately, every data release will be parsed, unusually so, to try to get a hint for both sides, the so-called hawks and the so-called doves, on what the next move should be.